Have you ever felt, deep in your heart, that someone you can't forget is standing at the edge of a life-changing decision? Maybe they've been silent for weeks or months. Maybe they walked away without explaining why. Yet something inside you keeps whispering that their story isn't over. What if that feeling isn't simply hope? What if, while you've been questioning every memory and every goodbye, they have been fighting the biggest battle of their life? A battle no one else could see? The human soul rarely changes overnight. It changes in silence after countless moments of doubt, fear, regret, and painful self-reflection. The greatest choices are not made with loud words or dramatic gestures. They are born in the quiet places of the mind, where old fears meet uncomfortable truths, and where the person we once were must decide whether to remain imprisoned by the past or step into an entirely new way of living. Today, we're going to explore what happens when someone finally reaches that turning point. We'll uncover the hidden psychological journey behind the biggest choice of their life, why distance may have been necessary, and what this transformation could mean for your connection. But as you listen, don't ask only whether your soulmate has changed. Ask yourself a more important question. If life placed the same choice before you today, would you have the courage to make it? Every life-changing decision begins long before it becomes visible. What appears to others as a sudden realization is often the final step in a long and exhausting inner struggle. The human mind has a remarkable ability to hide its deepest conflicts, even from itself. A person may smile, continue with daily routines, and appear emotionally distant, while beneath that calm surface, an invisible battle is unfolding. This battle is not between loving someone and walking away. It is between the familiar self that feels safe and the unknown self that demands growth. The familiar self clings to old habits, old fears, and old beliefs because they offer certainty, even when they bring pain. The unknown self whispers that life can become something greater, but accepting that invitation requires leaving behind everything that once felt secure. Many people mistake emotional distance for a lack of love. They assume that if someone truly cared, they would immediately reach out, express their feelings, and remove every doubt. Yet the deeper reality is often far more complicated. Strong emotions do not always create immediate action. Sometimes they awaken hidden fears that have been buried for years. The closer someone feels to genuine connection, the more likely old wounds begin to surface. Memories of rejection, betrayal, disappointment, or abandonment rise from the unconscious, influencing decisions without announcing their presence. The person may not even understand why they hesitate. They simply feel an overwhelming urge to protect themselves from a future that has not yet happened. This is why inner conflict can last for weeks, months, or even years. One part of the mind longs for intimacy, while another believes vulnerability is dangerous. One side dreams of building a meaningful relationship, while another insists that staying emotionally guarded is the only way to survive. These opposing forces quietly compete for control, creating confusion that often appears as mixed signals: silence, hesitation, or emotional withdrawal. From the outside, these behaviors seem irrational. From the inside, they feel necessary, because the unconscious always tries to preserve what it believes will keep a person safe. The turning point arrives when avoiding the truth becomes more painful than facing it. Every escape eventually reaches its limit. Every distraction loses its power. A person begins to recognize that the walls built for protection have also become walls of isolation. They realize they have been running not from another person, but from the parts of themselves they feared most. In that moment, something profound begins to shift. The decision they once resisted no longer feels like a terrifying risk. Instead, it becomes the only path toward inner peace. That is why the greatest choices are never born from impulse. They are born from the quiet victory of self-awareness over fear, when the soul finally chooses growth instead of remaining imprisoned by the past. Distance has a way of convincing us that something meaningful has come to an end. When someone becomes quiet, stops reaching out, or seems to disappear emotionally, the natural reaction is to assume that the connection has faded. Yet the deepest transformations rarely happen while two people are standing close to one another. They often begin in the silence that follows separation. What feels like abandonment on the surface can become the very space where hidden truths finally emerge. Without constant conversation, familiar routines, or emotional reassurance, a person is left alone with their own thoughts. It is in these quiet moments that the mind begins asking questions it had avoided for far too long. Silence removes distractions. It exposes the difference between temporary emotions and lasting feelings. When there is no one nearby to blame, impress, or depend on, the attention naturally turns inward. Old memories begin to return with surprising clarity. Past decisions are replayed again and again. Moments of kindness that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry new meaning, while words spoken in anger become impossible to forget. The mind starts recognizing patterns that were invisible during the noise of everyday life. This process is rarely comfortable because self-awareness often begins with discomfort rather than relief. Many people spend years building an identity around control. They convince themselves they do not need anyone, that independence means never being emotionally affected, or that vulnerability is a weakness to avoid at all costs. Distance quietly challenges these beliefs. The absence of someone important creates an emptiness that cannot always be filled with work, entertainment, or new experiences. Instead of proving emotional strength, endless distractions often reveal how much of life has been spent avoiding deeper feelings. This realization can become the first genuine step toward transformation. There is another reason separation carries such psychological power. When a meaningful person is no longer constantly present, they begin to exist within the imagination rather than daily reality. The unconscious mind starts comparing what was lost with what still remains. Superficial attractions lose their excitement because they cannot replace emotional depth. Temporary connections fail to satisfy because they lack the familiarity of a bond that touched something deeper within the personality. As this comparison continues, the person slowly understands that they were not simply missing another individual. They were missing the version of themselves that only emerged within that unique connection. This inner realization changes everything. Pride begins to lose its influence because protecting the ego no longer feels as important as living honestly. Fear slowly gives way to curiosity, and resistance is replaced by reflection. What once looked like rejection from the outside may have been the beginning of an invisible journey inward, where old defenses gradually weaken and a more authentic self begins to take shape. Sometimes the road away is not a denial of love at all. It is the difficult path through which a person finally discovers what love truly means. The greatest decision another person can make is not simply whether to stay or leave. It is whether they are willing to become someone who can truly love without being ruled by fear. Many people believe love is a matter of finding the right person, Yet the deeper challenge lies in becoming the right version of themselves. Until that transformation begins, every relationship is shaped by unconscious habits rather than conscious choice. A person may genuinely care for someone, but if they are still controlled by insecurity, pride, or unresolved emotional pain, those hidden forces quietly dictate their actions. Love becomes mixed with fear, affection becomes mixed with control, and closeness becomes followed by withdrawal. This is why meaningful relationships often trigger powerful internal resistance. They expose the parts of ourselves we would rather keep hidden. The masks that once helped us survive begin to crack. Someone who always appeared confident may discover a deep fear of rejection. Someone who believed they needed complete independence may realize they have been avoiding intimacy. Another may recognize that their constant need for reassurance was never about love, but about trying to fill an emptiness that existed long before the relationship began. These discoveries are uncomfortable because they challenge the identity a person has carried for years. Every individual creates a story about who they are. Over time, that story becomes so familiar that it feels like absolute truth. Yet many of those beliefs were formed during moments of fear rather than moments of clarity. A person may believe they are unworthy of lasting love because of past rejection. They may convince themselves that trusting others always leads to disappointment. These beliefs quietly shape every decision, even when they are no longer connected to present reality. Until those inner stories are questioned, no relationship can fully escape their influence. The biggest choice, then, is not choosing another person. It is choosing to release the old identity that has been limiting every connection. This requires honesty, humility, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Instead of blaming circumstances or expecting someone else to provide emotional security, the individual accepts responsibility for their own inner world. That shift changes everything. Love is no longer driven by desperation, loneliness, or the need for validation. It becomes an expression of freedom rather than fear. When someone reaches this point, their decisions become clearer because they are no longer reacting from old wounds. They begin listening to values instead of anxieties, truth instead of assumptions, and genuine affection instead of temporary emotions. The relationship is no longer about finding someone to complete what is missing. It becomes the meeting of two people who have learned that real love begins when they stop hiding from themselves. When another person finally makes a life-changing choice, it naturally captures your attention. You wonder what they decided, why they decided it, and whether that decision will bring them closer to you or farther away. Yet there comes a moment when the focus must gently shift. The deeper purpose of every meaningful connection is not only to reveal another person's inner world, but also to illuminate your own. Every encounter that touches the heart becomes an invitation to understand yourself more completely. It is easy to place life on hold while waiting for someone else's decision. Days become filled with questions, imagined conversations, and endless attempts to predict what the future might bring. The mind searches for certainty because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But while attention remains fixed on another person's journey, your own growth quietly stands still. The greatest mistake is believing that your peace depends entirely on what someone else chooses. Lasting peace can never be borrowed from another person. It must first be discovered within yourself. There is remarkable strength in accepting that some answers arrive only when you stop chasing them. The moment you begin investing your energy into your own development, your perspective starts to change. You become less interested in controlling outcomes and more interested in understanding yourself. Old fears lose their grip because your sense of worth is no longer tied to another person's approval. Instead of asking whether you are enough for someone else, you begin asking whether you are living honestly with yourself. That single change in perspective creates a freedom that external circumstances cannot easily take away. Personal transformation does not require abandoning hope or pretending that your feelings no longer matter. Rather, it asks you to hold love with open hands instead of closed fists. Genuine affection never demands possession. It allows both people the freedom to grow into who they are meant to become. If their path eventually leads back to yours, the connection will be built upon greater awareness rather than emotional dependence. If it does not, your journey will still have produced wisdom, resilience, and a deeper understanding of yourself. In the end, every significant relationship leaves behind a gift. Sometimes that gift is lifelong companionship. Sometimes it is a lesson that reshapes the way you see yourself and the world. Either way, nothing meaningful is truly wasted. Every disappointment, every moment of waiting, and every unanswered question has the potential to awaken a deeper level of consciousness. When you embrace that understanding, another person's decision no longer defines your future. Instead, it becomes part of the path that leads you toward a more authentic, grounded, and fearless version of yourself. Life-changing choices rarely arrive with dramatic announcements. They emerge quietly after countless invisible battles inside the human mind. If someone has finally made the biggest choice of their life, it is because something deep within them has shifted long before the outer world could see it. Yet, the greatest question is not only what they chose, it is what you will choose now. Will you continue living through fear, uncertainty, and old patterns, or will you allow this moment to awaken a deeper understanding of yourself? Because every meaningful connection ultimately reflects one timeless truth. The path to another soul always begins with the courage to truly know your own. If this message resonated with you, subscribe for more deep psychological insights into love, relationships, and self-discovery. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe your soulmate has already made their biggest choice? Or do you think the real decision is still ahead?